There were earthquakes where there should have been silence. Tremors deep beneath the crust of Sol 3 that sensors could not predict and seismographs refused to explain. And by the time the Iraqi coalition's Fifth Fleet registered the impossible. Readings. Admiral Chiress Zorneth had already begun preparing a statement for the diplomatic tribunal, something authoritative, something dismissive, something that would make the name Earth sound irrelevant. Chiress had served 33 standard cycles in the highest orbit of Iraqi Naval Command, known among her own species for her elegant ruthlessness and calculated rhetoric, and known beyond for never once retracting a statement she had issued. Before battle, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-threaded crests curling back along the ridge of her skull like ceremonial daggers, she was not the kind of commander who believed in unreadable data. Her adjutant, Ilrax Ven, shorter, younger, with skin that pulsed green under pressure, leaned toward the terminal screen, where shifting tectonic overlays were now displaying anomalies not seen even on living planets. "Mom," he said carefully, "the southern continent has displaced by exactly 12.4 kilometers in under 30 seconds, and the temperature signature is rising without magma presence." Chiress did not look at him. She stood upright with her hands clasped behind her. Back, the cold of the command deck humming against her spine. "Are we looking at a weapons test?" Ilrax hesitated, then pulled data onto the central halotable. No surface destruction, no radiation, no kinetic signatures. If it is, it doesn't follow any known sequence of hostile deployment or gravitational manipulation. No precursor frequencies, no debris, and no command trails. It's like the land just decided to move. Chiress narrowed her eyes as the fleet's observational satellites recalibrated. The image became clearer. Oceans bending slightly at unnatural angles, clouds turning in formation over a segment of the planet that had previously been marked as abandoned mineral fields. "Is this human?" she asked quietly, not expecting a real answer. Ilrax swallowed and replied anyway, "If it isn't, then they've let something else loose down there." Chiress didn't move, but her voice lowered just slightly, as if gravity had taken hold of her words and made them heavier. "Then, let it be known that the Iraqi did not arrive to invade. We arrived to understand. If Earth is still writing its legacy in the crust of its continents, then we owe it the courtesy of turning the page slowly, and somewhere, deep below the planetary surface, the field continued to expand steady, silent, and unclaimed by any known faction in the stars. Asterisk. There was no planetary alert from the humans, no defense grid raised, no activation of orbital beacons, no shield barrier drawn across the sky to suggest threat or protection. Not even a diplomatic hail was transmitted on the open coalition frequencies. Instead, something far stranger arrived, a signal so unassuming it almost passed as an echo. It came through a low-band analog channel, barely used in over a century, a bandwidth now considered archaic even among outer ring miners, and carried with it only three things: a geographic coordinate, an orbital descent vector, and a single phrase embedded in its pulse-coded tone: "Anchorage Dome awaits." It was not accompanied by emblem or encryption. There was no official planetary header. The frequency bore no origin signature, no flag, no name. It was clean, too clean, like something spoken not for surveillance, but for memory. And yet it made its way through every coalition signal filter without resistance, as though even the software understood it was not a message to block. Admiral Chiress Zorneth, Supreme Commander of the 3rd Iraqi Expeditionary Ring, had studied human linguistics before she had read their scattered myths, dissected the tangled roots of their syntax, parsed what their fractured archives once called nations. When Earth was first categorized as a volatile Class F civilization, she had participated in the theoretical simulations regarding its resource potential and geopolitical instability. But now, staring at that single phrase, she couldn't tell whether it was arrogance or ritual, threat, or invitation. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. She played the frequency once, then again, and again. Each time it ended in a soft, deliberate hum-long, steady, almost meditative. There was no background noise, no trailing resonance, no signature meant to identify intent. It was as if Earth had chosen not to convince or command, but simply to state. Behind her, Ilrax Ven, her second-in-command and primary cognitive relay officer, remained silent for several moments before stepping forward, a respectful half-measure behind her right shoulder. "Man," he said carefully, his voice low but steady, "shall I signal the outer fleet rings for reinforcement protocol? There's still time before descent." Chiress turned slowly, her motion deliberate, the angled plates of her ceremonial crest catching the soft amber glow of the command deck, refracting it across her uniform like fractured glass over water. "If we bring reinforcements," she said, "we announce war." Her gaze held firm on his. "If we descend alone, we announce confidence. Now tell me, Ilrax, which tone better suits a species that just moved a continent and did not bother? To brag about it?" Ilrax lowered his eyes, not in shame, but in humility. "Confidence, Admiral." She said nothing further. Her silence was her approval. "Prepare Shuttle 3, she said after a long pause, her tone steady. "We land within the hour." The descent craft Verdict of Vayari broke through Earth's stratosphere, not with power, but with precision. Its plasma shielding shimmered in layered pulses as it met air heavier than expected, dense with trace elements and electrostatic alignment. There was something beneath the clouds, not a weather pattern, but a tension as if the very atmosphere remembered how to resist intrusion and was choosing, for now, not to. Electromagnetic currents rippled gently across the hull in long fingers of containment, guiding the ship not away, but through, as though the planet were parting its breath to allow them in. Chiress remained at the forward viewport, her hands clasped lightly behind her back, her eyes locked on the surface below, where the vast outline of Anchorage Dome became visible through the cloud break. It was magnificent, not in size, but in certainty. A perfect obsidian hemisphere fused with angular towers, each structure alive with soft geothermal light that pulsed from beneath the earth, not like power, but like a heartbeat. The facility bore no scars of age or conflict, no defense turrets or visible shields. It sat in a broad basin of flattened stone and grass, surrounded not by a fence or defensive perimeter, but by an almost unsettling silence, as if the land itself demanded reverence. The platform awaiting them was broad enough to dock a coalition cruiser. But there were no ships, no beacons, no security personnel, no honor guard. Just space and invitation. The docking ramp hissed softly as it lowered, steam rising in low swirls from the pressure valves and dispersing quickly into the cool terrestrial air. Chiress descended first, fully dressed in her ceremonial admiralty uniform, the polished segments of her armor glinting in brief pulses beneath the weak daylight. Her data blade hung at her hip more symbol than weapon, and behind her Ilrax, followed with the diplomatic relay corps slung over one shoulder. Two figures stood waiting at the far end of the platform. They bore no weapons, no crests, no insignia. The first was tall, slender, smooth-headed, wrapped in deep, dark fabric that fell in weighted folds from shoulder to ankle. His hands were clasped behind his back. His posture was not confrontational, nor deferential. He stood with the stillness of someone who knew that time now belonged to him. And when he spoke, his voice came slow, precise, its depth calibrated perfectly, as though lowered not by nature, but by design, made to settle softly on alien ears. "We are the stewards," he said. "This place was built before the stars knew us, and it is kept for those who still believe the stars mean something." Chiress halted 2 paces from the base of the ramp. Her gaze scanned the platform, The distant structures, the terrain reading everything, assuming nothing. His words weren't a greeting. They weren't a warning. They were positioning. And what role? She asked carefully. Do you serve in Earth's current revelation? The second human stepped forward, not as tall, not as composed. His hair was streaked with white, his step uneven from what appeared to be an old injury. Yet there was a focus in his gaze, and a quiet gravity in his presence that made the breeze seem to hush itself before reaching him. He lifted a hand, not high, not commanding, just enough to mark his presence. To observe, he said. To ask, and only if required, to answer. Behind her, Ilrax activated the diplomatic sequence in his relay pack. A soft trill of recording signal pulsed once, and then went silent. Chiress exhaled, long and quiet, and took a single step forward, her boots striking the stone surface with a hollow metallic note that echoed for a second too long. Then another step, then another. If your goal was to intimidate the Iraqi, you failed, she said. Her voice carried with formal weight, but her words bent slightly at the edge measured, curious. But if your intent was to delay our assumptions, you may have succeeded. The tall steward tilted his head just slightly, not in mockery, but in appreciation. Then let's delay them further, he said, as the winds quieted again. The dome is open. Truth waits inside. The interior of Anchorage Dome was a living contradiction, ancient in architecture, yet pulsing with energy more refined than any structure Chiress had studied across 5 quadrants. Vaulted ceilings arched over smooth walkways lit by currents that flowed through the walls like veins of white fire, humming not with power, but with restraint, as if the entire facility had been designed not to function, but to wait. No guards, no drones, no defense mechanisms visible, and yet every step echoed like it had been measured before their arrival. Ilix Ven, uncharacteristically silent, scanned the radiant patterns along the columns that rose into the shadows above them. No data projection, no frequency spill, but the entire space is absorbing every word we speak. Chiress glanced at the humans walking calmly ahead of them. You designed this place as a surveillance chamber. The older man did not turn. It was not designed. It was grown, long before we knew how to explain its growth. Chiress paused mid-stride. Explain? The tall human, still unnamed, finally slowed, turning only slightly so that his voice would carry, but his eyes remained on the corridor. Ahead, you're standing in what was once a seed, a prototype for planetary defense, not a weapon, not a base, a response system, grown beneath the crust and fed by the instinct to survive. He placed a hand to the wall, and a faint pulse traveled outward like a breath taken by stone. When Earth stopped speaking, it was because it started listening. Ilrax looked to Chiress, visibly unsettled now. This isn't an outpost, Admiral. It's alive. She resisted the urge to draw her blade, not out of fear, but out of something rarer, misunderstanding. And what exactly does it listen for? The human turned fully then, his expression unreadable, his words slow, for betrayal, for return, for the second attempt. Chiress stared at him. Second? The older human nodded. Your coalition visited us once before. Before you wore banners, before you spoke unity. You came to test, not to talk. Ilrax activated his relay. Those words would reach command within minutes. Chiress stepped closer, eyes narrowing. There are no records of such contact. That, the younger human replied, was the point. They resumed walking, and the dome pulsed again, subtle, rhythmic, like the calm heartbeat of something far larger than the structure itself, something beneath. And as they turned into the inner chamber, Chiress felt a rare sensation stir in her chest. Not dread, something colder recognition, kind that comes only when a lie has lived too long in official memory. Asterisk, the inner chamber of Anchorage Dome was circular, massive, and dimly lit from above by slow-turning prisms that refracted ambient heat into ribbons of pale gold, as though the room itself refused artificial light and preferred the memory of sunlight filtered through time. There were no thrones, no banners, no raised platforms. Only a long table of obsidian alloy, set low to the ground, with 6 chairs, 3 on each side, none labeled dot. The younger human gestured to them. "Sit where you wish." "The room does not require rank." Chiress remained standing. "I do, Ilrex." Sut, quietly placing the relay device onto the surface, where it blinked twice in confirmation recording, transmitting. Cataloging every word, the older human lowered himself with some effort into one of the chairs across from him, hands folding as if in prayer, but eyes never closing. The other remained standing, fingers still laced behind his back, like a shadow. Waiting for its moment to speak, Chiress finally took the seat directly opposite the standing human. "I've reviewed over 4,000 planetary introductions. Never have I met a species that begins its dialogue by referencing betrayal." The human spoke slowly, each word measured like stone being set into a wall. "That is because most species you meet have already forgotten theirs. We haven't," Ilrex tilted his head. "You're referring to a visit no one remembers." "Someone remembered," the older man said, softer. "They buried the proof. But the dome kept it." A slight vibration passed under the floor. No quake, no warning, just a presence. Chiress held her composure, though her inner sensors spiked a warning to her neural interface. "Let me understand. You claim the Iraqi coalition long before it became a coalition sent a party to Earth, and that party attacked?" "No," the standing human replied, stepping forward now, voice still calm. "They observed, they measured, and they determined humanity was not worth preserving. They left a fragment of code behind a marker, something that would tell others this world had already been passed over, earned and failed." Chiress inhaled sharply. "That code? Are you suggesting it was placed beneath your crust?" The man nodded, and the dome responded. It grew around it, encased it, learned from it, and waited for the next one to come carrying the same signature. Ilrex leaned forward, his voice now more strained. "That's what triggered the movement. That's why the land shifted. It wasn't tectonic, it was reactive. The planet detected the same coalition frequency." The older man nodded again. "Your presence isn't unexpected. It's overdue." For a moment, silence claimed the chamber. A silence that didn't feel empty but full. Waited. Chiress spoke slowly now, her voice dropping. "Then why didn't you retaliate?" The human looked at her and smiled, not with triumph, not with malice, but with understanding. Because silence was retaliation. And it worked longer than war ever could. Asterisk. The hum beneath the floor grew louder, not sharp, not metallic, but deep and slow, like something vast was breathing in rhythm with the ground itself. Lights shifted along the chamber walls, forming lines and geometric sequences that weren't for decoration. They were language. Chiress watched them carefully. "What are we looking at?" The younger human turned slightly, watching the glyphs. "Move as though listening to music instead of data. This is the code left by your predecessors. Your coalition didn't just mark Earth as a failed species. They uploaded a recursive Signal 1 designed to prevent re-engagement by any scouting. Fleets under shared banners. A warning system." Ilrex's breath caught. "I've studied signal architecture since my 2nd cycle. There's no record of such a protocol ever existing. Because the signal never returned to your archives." The older man opened his hand, revealing a sphere of dull metal, no larger than a fruit core. "It stayed here, buried, observed, and over the centuries, Earth wrote a response to it." Chiress leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You responded to a ghost transmission?" The standing man's voice didn't change tone, but something heavier settled into it now. "We responded to being erased. The chamber darkened for a moment, then surged into light again, the glyphs now shifting into recognizable patterns. Coalition symbols, fleet markings from 3 centuries ago, names of vessels long decommissioned or classified under first expansion record Silix, stood suddenly. That's Admiral Chiress Seal. That ship never returned. Its logs were declared corrupted due to solar interference. Not corrupted, said the older human. Quarantined. Earth captured the signal and restructured it. We never attacked. We absorbed it. That's what the dome does. It listens. It adapts. It holds the memory of intrusion. Chiress exhaled through her nose. So this place is your weapon. The standing man walked slowly around the table, not in menace, but in explanation. No, Admiral. This planet is the weapon. The dome is merely its voice. A long pause fell. Chiress stared at the walls as more data spilled outward. Names, dates, emblems, the visual archive of a hidden history. She spoke again, quieter now. And what do you expect us to do with this? The man stopped. Understand, accept, or ignore. But no, this Earth didn't forget. And it didn't forgive. It evolved. Ilrax turned to Chiress, eyes full of conflict. Ma'am, the dome has already learned our language, our signal patterns. If it has reconstructed this much from a dead transmission, then it has likely mapped our modern fleet behavior too. Chiress didn't respond immediately. She stared at the shifting symbols, the ghost fleet names reappearing from a past her superiors had buried. Then she stood, slowly. That it's no longer a question of whether we make contact. It's whether we deserve a response. The floor stilled, the hum faded. But the dome did not go quiet. It waited, and Chiress understood. It was her turn to speak. Chiress stood at the head of the long obsidian table, her armor catching faint streaks of prism light from above. Every breath she took filtered through the weight of something no military textbook had ever trained her to face. A world that remembered, a world that chose silence as strategy, and a species that had let the ground speak louder than its leaders. She glanced once at Ilrax. He had stopped recording, not because he forgot, but because instinct told him that what was being said now did not belong in archives. It belonged in caution. The younger human had sat. Finally, his hands rested on the table, his posture composed, but his voice came without pride. When the dome first awakened, it didn't know what it was reacting to. It simply reached outward like a hand in the dark, reading every satellite, every frequency, every hint of memory left in the crust by those who touched us and left thinking they had touched nothing. Chiress took one step forward, slow, and it chose not to strike. It had nothing to prove, the older man said, voice almost a whisper. Earth was never built to impress. It was built to endure. The room dimmed again, this time softer, the gold prisms above retreating slightly, as if the dome itself wished to fade into listening. Chiress turned, facing the humans fully. If endurance is your power, then why send? For us now? Why reveal what has remained buried for centuries? You could have stayed hidden another 1,000 years. The tall human finally smiled, but it wasn't triumph. It was permission, because you came too close to doing it again. Your fleet skimmed our atmosphere. You marked us again. You calculated survivability curves on a world that already proved itself. And so, he paused, eyes holding hers. We moved the ground to ask a question. Have you changed? Ilrax finally found words. That's why we're here. This isn't a warning. It's a test. The older human nodded once. A test we've offered only once before. They failed. Chiress didn't flinch, but her hands curled slightly. On the table's edge. And if we do as well. There was no threat in the human's response, just a finality that settled into the air like gravity. Then Earth returns to its silence. But this time, it won't be waiting in the quiet. "It will be ready." The chamber said nothing more. The lights paused their movement, and for the first time since entering Anchorage Dome, Admiral Chiress Zorneth felt something she could not log, not quantify, not relay. She felt small not because she was weak, but because she stood before a planet that had learned to speak without words. It began not with thunder or fire, but with a subtle recalibration of light, every beam in the chamber adjusting itself in perfect synchrony, as if responding not to power fluctuation, but to purpose, bending and converging toward the center of the room, like silent observers drawn to a courtroom they had long waited to convene. The dome, in its quiet and eerie awareness, was not illuminating space, it was clarifying it, drawing a luminous line between what had once been called myth and what now stood as unrelenting evidence. From the heart of the obsidian table, Painel eased open without the faintest sound, as though even the mechanisms of the dome respected the weight of what was about to be revealed. Slowly, with the ceremonial precision of a memory long preserved, a small cube rose no larger than a soldier's field ration, its matte gray surface flawless and unmarked, save for a dim pulsing rhythm that throbbed within it like the echo of a forgotten heartbeat. It didn't blink for attention. It pulsed with remembrance. The older human stepped forward, his gesture subtle, almost reverent, as though he were not simply presenting an object, but unsealing a wound that had waited centuries to be acknowledged. "This," he said, voice low and steady, "is the artifact retrieved from your first encounter. The signal you embedded in it is still intact. The code that labeled Earth as a failed experiment still speaks." Ilrax froze, his hands hovering above his relay device, fingers trembling slightly not out of fear, but awe. His eyes scanned the cube as though its very existence rewrote the rules of reality he built his career upon. "If that's authentic," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of history unraveling itself, "then this would unravel the foundational myths of the Coalition. This would mean centuries of archived certainty were built on omission." But before his thought could fully take form, the tall human cut through with the calm finality of one who had carried the truth long enough to know how it landed in the unprepared. "We are not here to undo what you've built," he said. "We are here to remind you what you chose to forget." The cube came alive in silence, projecting upward a spiraling array of grainy, untouched visuals. Raw footage poured into the room like truth untamed, images from an ancient Iraqi vessel's logs, unfiltered and without commentary. There were glimpses of early Earth civilizations, captured from high-orbit chaotic cities stitched together by ambition and fear, smoke, rising from industries still learning to balance growth and consequence, oceans lapping at borders drawn in arrogance and hope. The humans in the images were divided, uncertain, volatile, but alive in a way that no algorithm could quantify. Then came the verdict: cold, clinical, final, potential, minimal, cultural convergence, improbable, defensive capabilities, primitive, recommend abandonment and suppression, upload code, JX33 Nihil. The words echoed in the air like a gavel across a grave. Chiress did not speak immediately. Her gaze locked on the designation projected before her, JX33. It was not a label she had ever expected to see in context. It was a term she had once quoted in academic sparring, a line from classified theoretical doctrine, a relic of old policy buried beneath layers of digital concrete, referenced only in hypothetical debates about planetary rejection. But now, the code stood before her not as concept, but as confession. And she understood. She had memorized a scar and called it strategy. The younger human watched her with calm certainty, his voice neither accusatory nor triumphant, but layered, with the exhaustion of truth withheld for far too long. "You see it now," he said. "Your judgment wasn't a weapon. It was a scar carved deep into our cultural DNA. You didn't just mark us as unworthy. You made us remember it with every generation that followed. We did not heal around the wound. We evolved through it. The holographic feed shifted again. This time to modern data feeds, far more recent, far more devastating. It showed Iraqi patrol ships approaching Earth's atmospheric boundary, their energy signatures distinct, their flight patterns defensive but confident. And then, without sound or explosion, a change occurred. One ship was caught mid-descent by an invisible field, one not detected by standard protocols. There was no impact, no combustion, no warning. A vessel simply came apart, systematically, elegantly, broken down atom by atom, its metallic hull disassembled with surgical precision, its contents held aloft in Earth's upper orbit like a sculpture of shattered certainty, not as threat, but as proof. Chiress slowly lowered herself into her chair, the tension in her spine giving way to something heavier, an ache not of fear, but of realization. We assumed interference, navigational error, atmospheric resistance. The older human's voice came with neither smugness nor rage, only a calm that could only be born from deep, unshakable control. It was mercy. You were about to repeat the pattern, your ships, your frequency, your posture. The dome intervened before your history could collapse into repetition. Earth didn't retaliate. It restrained. Ilrax's voice trembled now, quieter than ever, as if speaking too loudly would rupture the fragile peace in the air. Why not strike back? Why not exact vengeance? You had every right, every reason to remind us with fire. The tall human looked toward the holographic field once more, and his answer came like the closing line of a song written in centuries. Because force is what made you forget us the first time. If we return with it now, we become you. And that would mean Earth has failed itself? Chiress turned her gaze back to the cube. The hologram had changed again. Now it displayed a map half known. Half blank, the familiar stars of coalition control glittered in white, but beside them stretched unfamiliar constellations, vast, unmapped corridors of space. It pulsed not with ownership, but with invitation. Is that a threat? She asked, voice composed but uncertain. The human met her eyes and shook his head. No, he said softly. It's an invitation. One last time. Asterisk far above the Earth's curve, aboard the Iraqi High Command vessel Trinix Fall, Grand Commander. Varex Taluan stood inside the War Council chamber, its glass walls wrapped in real-time data feed, showing Earth rotating below with serene audacity, as though the entire planet wasn't presently outmaneuvering everything the Coalition had ever classified as advanced. His neural interface buzzed with Chiress' live feed, looping one message over and over. Planetary AI has not only restructured original Coalition code, it has anticipated modern fleet behavior. All military postures are known. He had been skeptical. He had called humanity fractured, misguided, emotionally undisciplined. But now, he stood facing the undeniable. Earth had not just survived history. It had absorbed it, matured into something. No doctrine accounted for a quiet juggernaut, with no need to prove itself. Opened the diplomatic core line and issued the rarest of invocations in Coalition command. Clause V. Tarn, the parley of last resorts. It was an act not of desperation, but of recognition. It had only been used 4 times in recorded galactic history, all before devastating wars that might have been avoided. Had pride not intervened, transmit my request, Varex said, to Anchorage Dome, full diplomatic standing. I come not with fleet nor weapon. I come to listen. 3 rotations later, his shuttle touched down where Chiress had once stood. The platform had not changed, the humans had not changed, and neither had the quiet. Same older steward approached, his pace slower now, perhaps in deference, perhaps in trust. Varex, tall and pale-skinned, his ceremonial crests folded inward in symbol of neutrality, extended his hand, a gesture unused in Iraqi custom. But known to humans, the old man took it without pause. A brief pressure, firm, deliberate. "I am not here to supply an ultimatum," Varek said. "I am here because silence speaks with more precision than threat, and I would rather hear your voice." "Then guess your intentions again," the steward smiled. "This is all we asked for." The two walked alone into the dome. No security, no protocols, just two civilizations, side by side, as they passed beneath the archway carved from obsidian and memory. Varek asked one question, not strategic, not tactical, but human in its simplicity. "Do you still believe we are capable of change?" The steward looked forward, hands behind his back. "That's what you're here to decide," and the door closed behind them, not as a warning, but as the beginning of an answer. The central hall of Anchorage Dome had altered itself. No walls moved. No mechanical shift was heard. But Varek felt it the moment they crossed the threshold, an imperceptible increase in density, as if the air had been asked to remember every word spoken here before, and was now pressing gently on his lungs to ensure he'd add only what mattered. The room was simpler than he expected. No tactical displays, no symbol of planetary dominance, just a long, sloping terrace that descended into a circular depression where a globe of light hovered. Silently above a stone pedestal, the steward gestured toward it. "This is Earth's stabilizer core. Not a reactor, not a command node, a field origin. What you call gravity, we call agreement. Earth holds its shape not through force, but through coordination of purpose. That's what this is. Planetary will, bound by engineered intention." Varek remained still. He had seen stars detonated, moons folded under time thrusters. But this was worse. This was better. This was controlled permanence. He circled the pedestal once, slowly. "There are no defenses because nothing needs to be defended. You are the threshold. The planet reacts because you've become the trigger." The steward nodded. "We are not the apex of this world. We are its students. For a century, we've lived not above Earth, but beneath it until the dome deemed we were ready to speak for it again." Varek folded his arms behind his back, watching the field pulse, slow and breathing, so the movement. "We observed from orbit. A warning." The human met his gaze. "A motion without weapon. A signal without casualty. A reminder to those who thought silence meant surrender." Varek studied the glow for another moment, then spoke carefully. "This violates every known category of warfare doctrine. A world that can move itself, choose its gravity, speak only when it needs to speak. This makes you a what? A weaponized civilization? A moral one? A mirror?" The steward's response came like stone carved in dusk. "No, it makes us ready." Varek turned then, fully, for the first time, something in him softened not out of fear, but out of reverence. "I came expecting to negotiate limits. I find you have none. So instead, I ask, what do you want?" The steward stepped forward, only once, and offered his answer as if it had been held for centuries. "Not conquest. Not revenge. Just recognition. And if we fail to offer it?" The core's light pulsed once. Not brighter, not louder, but deeper. Varek felt it in his bones. "We do not destroy." The steward said, "We remind." Again and again, until the galaxy no longer forgets us. The dome did not seal itself when Varek emerged from the Hall of Intention. It remained open behind him, not out of neglect or ritual, but as though the planet itself had chosen to bear silent witness to the moment, offering neither closure nor command, only the quiet gravity of understanding. Aboard the command vessel, Trinek's fall, his transmission had already begun its descent into the encrypted cores of Coalition High Councils, uncensored, unfiltered, and impossible to ignore. It carried the raw and irrefutable evidence of what Earth had become. the long-buried echo code, the dismantling of fleets with precision, but no bloodshed, a living record of a planet that had responded to erasure not with fury, but with resolve. Most within the coalition would react with alarm, their reflexes conditioned by history and doctrine. Some would immediately advocate containment or retaliation. Yet a few, perhaps the only ones who truly mattered, would pause long enough to understand what had been offered instead. Virex was no longer standing as a strategist. He was standing as a witness, and in his hands, he did not carry terms of surrender or declarations of superiority. He carried a choice, quiet and absolute. Turned once more at the edge of the obsidian ramp where the dome met the sky, his gaze finding the steward who had guided him. Still standing beneath the vast celestial canopy, not with expectation, not with challenge, but with the stillness of one who had long ago made peace with both patience and truth. What lies beyond this? Virex asked, his voice low, not out. Of doubt, but reverence. If we accept Earth not as a fledgling civilization, but as a force that has grown through fire instead of recoiling from it, what awaits us on the other side of that recognition? The steward lifted his eyes to the horizon, slow and deliberate, and then gestured not toward the dome, but toward the stars, where above them, a constellation map reshaped itself mid-sky, glowing patterns stretching outward like veins of possibility. These were not the star charts of Earth's own ancient astronomers, nor the sterile gridwork of Araki navigation arrays. These were invitations' unfinished maps, silently waiting to be named by those who came not with claims of dominion, but with questions worthy of being heard. These are corridors we have never named, the steward said quietly. We held them in reserve for those who arrive not to conquer, but to listen. And as Virex stood in the presence of unspoken peace, watching those foreign stars bloom like new thoughts across the cosmos, he understood that what Earth had offered was not a seat at the table of power, but a redefinition of what it meant to be powerful at all. He extended his hand, not as a formality, but as acknowledgement. The steward accepted it without hesitation, without fanfare. There were no documents, no negotiations, only contact, only agreement, and for the first time in recorded memory, the dome released a sound, not a siren, not a broadcast, but a voice made of wind and stone, layered with tones that echoed, not in the air, but in the bones of those who stood beneath it, a language older than conquest, deeper than diplomacy. A new signal emerged. It did not declare control. It did not claim territory. It carried only the memory of patience, the strength of restraint, and the quiet confidence of a world that had nothing left to prove in the days that followed. No fleets entered Earth's orbit. No ultimatums were sent, but across distant sectors, in systems untouched by human hands, new stars began appearing in coalition navigation systems, subtly embedded, left unnamed, traced only by the careful end. Each one carried the same embedded phrase, hidden in its data stream, like a whisper sent across the galaxy. We remember Earth.